Hi guys, Marvin here from shopsadopage.com, and today, after a few weeks of testing, I'm finally ready to give you guys my full review of the Specter Pro 34UW100 Ultrawide monitor, a monitor that has a 1440p curved VA panel, 100Hz refresh rate, 5 milliseconds of response time, and a very good sRGB color accuracy. With that said, let's get into it. Alright guys, before we start, if you haven't watched my unboxing and first impressions of this monitor, you can check it out here so that you can have an idea what you're getting. Now let's start our review with the design and construction. The Specter Pro 34UW100 features slim bezels as you can see here, with just a slightly larger bottom bezel. At the center, we have a Specter Pro branding, and below it we have a rather simple and thin V-shaped stand, but it's still quite sturdy and stable. At the lower right corner, we have the OSD controls with individual buttons rather than a joystick style control. At the back of the monitor, interestingly, it has this hanger that you can use for cables or even a headset, though it doesn't make sense since it is hidden at the back. We also have a red LED illumination right here that, though useless, is also a nice touch. By the way, this monitor is also VESA mount compatible. Now back in front, since some of you are asking about it, the dimensions of this monitor are 806mm in length, 360mm in width with a thickness of around 45mm give or take. The curve rating on this monitor is 1500R, which is better than the 1800R on the XT27Q that I previously reviewed as well. The build quality of this monitor is pretty decent, and the mounting bracket at the back is easy to install. Although it does have some flex on it when you adjust the tilt, once upright the monitor is quite sturdy. Speaking of tilt, unfortunately this monitor has limited adjustments. The only thing you can adjust is tilting downwards and upwards, and that's about it. You cannot pivot it horizontally or vertically, though the latter doesn't make sense at this ultra-wide form factor. Now in terms of ports, it has a built-in power supply here, so there's no external power adapter required. We also have a 3.5mm audio jack, 1 display port, and 3 HDMI ports. Back in front again, let's check out the OSD settings. Right here we have the main settings, game crosshairs, display presets, RGB range, and power. Checking out the main settings, we have input source, so we have 1 display port, 1 HDMI 2.0, and 2 HDMI 1.4. We also have the brightness and contrast, color setting, picture quality setting where you can set your desired response time, which we'll dig in deeper later. We also have the display, audio, multi-window, OSD settings, and other where you can enable Freesync. And like I said, we have the game crosshair, and we have these display presets depending on your preference. And lastly, an option to choose between full and limited RGB range. Alright guys, let's move on to the most important part of this review, which is about the quality of the display and its features. Okay, so let's start with Gysnc capability. With the recent update to NVIDIA drivers, you can now enable Gysnc on Freesync monitors like the Specter Pro 34UW100, and as per my testing, it actually works properly. I don't see any unwanted artifacts or screen tearing as you can see on these examples. Now, you might not notice the difference between Vsync and Gysnc, or maybe you do, but basically the difference between them is that Vsync just forces your graphics card to match the refresh rate of your monitor, whereas Gysnc, much like Freesync, does it the other way around. It forces your monitor to dynamically adapt its refresh rate to the frames that your graphics card is pushing. Vsync also poses issues such as input lag that Freesync and Gysnc doesn't have because they are doing the syncing adjustments on a hardware level. Moving on, in terms of motion blur, a higher refresh rate monitor allows you to see images much smoother as you can see in these examples from 15 frames per second to 100 frames per second. Now in terms of response time, this monitor only has 5 milliseconds of response time, which ideally should be the borderline for gaming and most probably not good for competitive gaming. Response time is the ability of a monitor to change a pixel's color from one shade of gray to another. A monitor with faster response time provides a much smoother movement, while a slow response time will give you motion blur and ghosting since the monitor can't keep up with the fast-paced color shifting. Now, it's very hard to show the results in real time on this video because of camera frame rates and export settings, so what I did is I shot these testings using my camera at 120 frames per second, slow it down, and take a screenshot so that you can see the difference properly. This monitor actually has a few options when it comes to response time, and as per my testing, to my surprise, setting it at high yields the best results as you can see on these examples. At high settings, we can clearly see a reduce in ghosting. Now when it comes to display flickering, when I first set this up, sometimes I encounter slight flickering when changing the display from white to black. But for some reason, after I calibrated the display, I don't see any flickering anymore. I'm not sure what happened, but there's that. When it comes to the quality of the display, it has decent contrast and sharpness out of the box, And although curved, it also doesn't have many dark spots on any angle as you can see here. It also only has minimal backlight bleeding as well. I've heard quite a few people that encountered backlight bleeding, but as per my sample here, I don't find that an issue. As long as it doesn't affect viewing experience, minimal backlight bleeding should be fine, but if it's excessive, then better have it checked from where you bought it just to make sure. Although the display on this monitor is only VA panel, the viewing angle is actually pretty decent. Brightness and colors fade a bit, but you can still definitely read text and recognize colors unlike with a TN panel. Speaking of text, I find the sharpness of this monitor decent as well. I don't see any problems at all with reading text on the screen. Now moving on to actual use case scenarios of this monitor, in terms of productivity such as content creation, having an ultra-wide screen like this allows you to have lots of real estate to work with, especially for video editing. Speaking of editing, one concern about curved monitors when it comes to photo and video editing is the distortion, but personally I don't find it an issue for videos, but the concern really is for graphic design since proper alignment and shape sizes are vital. In my application it is fine, but for serious designers, a flat panel is much more ideal. For media consumption, an ultra-wide curved monitor like this gives that very immersive experience, especially if you're watching videos in a 21:9 aspect ratio. However, most videos nowadays are still at 16:9 aspect ratio, so most of the time you'll have two large black bars on each side. Now when it comes to color reproduction of the Specter Pro 34UW100, I am very glad to say that it has a decent 93% sRGB coverage and 70% Adobe RGB coverage. This should be fine for most applications, especially if you're only editing images and videos for web and social media postings. However, if you're into events and print business, you may want to opt for a more accurate monitor, especially with an IPS panel. This is actually one of the advantages of VA panels compared to TN. It's really a great middle ground between TN and IPS. It can achieve decent refresh rate and response time for gaming, while still able to reproduce colors better for productivity and image and video editing. Essentially, if your focus is more for gaming, a TN panel with extremely fast response time and high refresh rate is ideal. If your focus is more for productivity, an IPS panel with great color accuracy and good viewing angles is the way to go. And on the other hand, if you want the best of both worlds and the compromises don't affect your applications, then your best option is a VA panel. Now for gaming, much like with media consumption, having an ultra-wide monitor like this allows you to have an immersive gaming experience, especially if you're playing adventure, role-playing, and even FPS games in story mode. For competitive gaming, it is quite arguable. Some prefer regular flat monitors, especially those who are playing competitively. But some also prefer ultra-wide monitors like this for more visual perspective. However, it will still depend on games if they support ultra-wide view natively or if it will just stretch the screen out. Now, playing normally, I don't see much ghosting, but looking at it closer using the slow motion testing, we can clearly see that there is ghosting with this monitor, which I am not actually surprised, especially that it only has a 5 milliseconds of response time. Okay guys, before we wrap this up, I would just like to address one frequently asked concern about Specter Pro monitors, and that is heat issues. Now for the Specter Pro XT27Q that I previously reviewed, I agree that it has heat issues, especially on the screws, but for this particular model, the Specter Pro 34UW100, it doesn't have any heat issues whatsoever. As you can see, I can easily touch the screw without any problem, and the temperature is only around 34 degrees, which is about the same as our ambient temperature. This is with the monitor running for more than 24 hours at 100Hz refresh rate. Alright guys, so to conclude, the Specter Pro 34UW100 in my opinion sits at a very good place right now for both productivity and casual gaming with a good 1500R curved 1440p panel. It has a decent 93% sRGB color accuracy for photo and video editing with tons of real estate to work with. On the other side of things, it has an acceptable 100Hz 5 milliseconds response time for casual gaming if you're not too sensitive to ghosting. Heat issues are pretty much non-existent on this monitor and the build quality is decent as long as you know how to handle things properly. As for my stand and interest with this monitor, it has not changed since I first unboxed it. I still like this monitor to be my main monitor as it really fits my setup and overall workflow as well as for casual gaming. And there you have it guys, thank you for watching. Make sure to check the full article link below. If you haven't watched my setup tour 2019 where I also featured this monitor, you can check it out here. Thanks to EasyPC for sending this in, you can get this from their official store link below. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you like this, and see you next time. Have a great day.